Have you recently entered the tree service industry and you're looking to level up and more importantly make more money? Well, you stopped at the right video. My name is Jose. I am a contract climbing arborist and I'm here to share my knowledge with you. So with all that said, welcome to another episode of the Arborist Study Guide. The aim of this series is to try and give knowledge from the ground up to hopefully help you advance in your career a little bit sooner. Definitely a lot of things that I wish I would have known starting out. You know, it is a little bit difficult to find mentorship in this industry sometimes. So being able to YouTube it, as most of us have learned through YouTube, is kind of ideal. So yeah, with all that being said, for today's episode, what we're going to be focusing on is a very beginner knot that most of us should know, especially if you've been in this industry long enough. And you know, it's a very introductory knot. So it is called the running bowline. And to incorporate it all in one, we're going to also do the bowline, which is one and the same, just in a different configuration. Now, what you will find out about a lot of knots is, depending on how you tie them, dress and set them, they can become somewhat of a different knot, but it will still be the same knot in a sense. So with all that said, let me show you guys what I'm talking about. All right, before we get too far into the knot tying and how to utilize it, I just want to briefly mention that this video is going to be pertaining to you as a ground guy. And this knot can be utilized in climbing, but I will separate them in playlists so that you can easily reference them as needed. So when you're ready for the climbing one, I'll do a separate video specifically for the running bowline, how it pertains to climbing. But this video is going to be specifically on how to utilize it as a grounds guy. So with all that out of the way, now let's get into some of the basics. So we have this lovely rope here in front of us, and just some key references when it comes to knot tying that I think is important to mention. First of all, we have certain configurations that we put the rope into, and let me just show you what I mean by that. So we're going to start off by making a U with the rope. As you can see, it's a U right there. Or flip it around for more of a U shape. This right here is what we would call making a bite, right? That is a bite. This is what we would call making a loop. As you can see right there, doesn't matter how you configure it, that is always a loop. This end here, the end that I'm going to be moving and twisting around, is what we would call our working end. And the other end, the longer end, is our bitter end. So just some simple things there to note, just so that if I say I'm going to make a loop, you understand what the loop is and you can easily reference that. Okay, so now let's get into the actual tying process. So how do we tie the bowline? And we'll start off with the bowline. Well, it's very simple. Start by making a loop on your bitter end, also known as the tail end, which would be the longer end, right? So what we'll do, and it's very important to note, we are going to create a loop, as shown right there, with our working end on top. So you can see there, right? So very, very important that you do this motion and do it right. This loop is everything for tying the knot right. Because a lot of people do not realize that this part is the most important part, in my opinion, because if you do not create this right, the entire knot can be very confusing. So as long as you get this portion right, everything else just falls into place. We start off by that, right? So I'm going to show you again. Create that loop with your working end on top of the bitter end, the tail end. Now what we have is a bite with a loop on our left hand side. I am right-handed, by the way. What we are going to do is we are going to take our working end, we are going to stick it underneath that loop we just created. Now, what we want to do is tuck it behind our bitter end, and we're going to bring it right back into that loop to bring it in somewhat parallel with our working end. Now we're going to grab the working end, both strands right here, and we're going to grab our bitter end, and we're just going to tighten to adjust the knot properly. And there you go. That is your bowline. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys my personal preference on how to tie it. What I just showed previously was the beginner way, in my opinion. This way is a little bit quicker for me. So what I do is I'm going to create that loop again, but instead I'm going to create a bite on the bitter end, stick that through the loop, and then I'm going to grab my working end, stick it in between that bite that I just created on the bitter end. I'm going to grab the two strands here of the working end, and I'm going to grab the bitter end and feed that bite right through the loop. It's a little bit quicker, a little bit easier for me to make the bowline. I'll show you guys again. Again, very important how we create that loop, right? Create that loop, take your hand from underneath and just pinch the bitter end and get it right through. Then we take our working end, pinch the two sides there, and then we grab the bitter end and feed it right back through. It's a lot quicker for me, and just two different methods of the same knot. So you can choose your preference on what you find easier. Alrighty, so now that we know how to tie the bowline, let's get to the running bowline. So again, like I mentioned, it's pretty much the same knot, just with a few different steps. So we will start the same way that we did with the bowline by creating our loop. Again, with our working end on top, as you can see there. And it is a little bit easier to do this. So take it in steps. Step one, create your loop with your working end on top. Bitter end on bottom, as you can see there. We just pinch that loop, keep it nice and uniform. Now what we want to do is grab our working end and tuck it underneath our bitter end. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a bite to capture the bitter end, and we're not going to touch that bitter end. All of our work is going to be done with our working end. So again, do the same steps that you did on the bowline. Now what we got to do is come up underneath, around, and right back through that same loop. Then we tighten down. Pinch the two strands on the working and the bitter end there. Now we have a dynamic knot. You can see we have the bowline here, but we've managed to capture this other strand, the bitter end. And what that does is it allows the knot to move, to be cinched down on something, which would be our tree, which I'll show you in some examples after we're done tying the knots. Alrighty, so now that we have the beginner way out the way, let's go ahead and do the more advanced way, my personal preference. And this becomes a lot easier once you've practiced it. So that is going to be the key for all these things, just practice. So again, we're going to make our loop, working end on top. So you can see there, give ourselves enough working end there. Then we come in from up underneath that loop and we grab that bite. Make that bite right there. Then we take our working end, tuck it underneath again, the bitter end, and then we feed it through the bite. Grab the two strands there of the working end, And up top here on our bitter end, and just pull through and adjust, cinch it down, adjust, make sure everything looks nice and neat. And there we have it, running bowline.
Okay, so for the interest of keeping this video a little bit shorter and more concise, I'm not going to show you every conceivable way that I can imagine to utilize this, not only the more efficient methods of utilizing it to be more productive in your day-to-day operations. So the first example that I have here is used in removal settings, where you can throw a ball in a tree, try to get a high tie-in point, then isolate it, meaning both lines of the rope will come in parallel with nothing in the way. You tie your running bowline and then send it up, cinch it up high. That way you have leverage on the tree and then you can remove the tree. Or you can basal anchor it, which would just be throw a line up, try to get a good, nice sized union, have the rope come down on the back end, and then you can tie your running bowline at the bottom, keeping in mind that you're doubling the forces that you pull on that union, so keep that in mind. And yeah, you cut your notch, back cut it, pull on it, and then there you go. So you're being more useful in the sense that you can set this stuff up so that that way your climber doesn't have to. Well, let's move on to the next example. Okay, and if you really want to raise some brows and you're really after that check increase or that pay raise, this right here is what a top tier groundsman will do for you. So as a climber, you already have your rigging points set up or whatever it is, you know. Sometimes you can do it from the ground, sometimes you'll already be in the tree. But for example, in this scenario, I set it up from the ground. We're going to be taking out an overextended limb that's very big, but we're capable of setting up everything from the ground, which saves us a lot of energy, right? Because we can take a monster lead from the ground, set everything from the ground, and then your climber doesn't have to be scrambling all over the place, utilizing a lot of energy because it is sometimes difficult to kind of move around the tree. And so setting all this up from the ground can be a lot easier for somebody. So if you take note here of what's going on, I threw my throw weight up high in a union, which I feel comfortable that it'll sustain the weight of what we're trying to do. But I also want it high enough for it to be butt heavy. And take note right here of what I'm doing. So when you're going to set up a remote rig like this, you got to make sure that you have that tail end if your line is already set up in a rigging point. Because if you send the line all the way up and you just get your working end down to you, that bitter end is going to be up in the tree way up high and you're not going to be able to tie the knot. So you have to make sure that you have enough slack on the bitter end or your tail end when you're sending up the working end. That way you have both lines, again, parallel to you, and then you can tie your knot, which I'm about to do here right now. So as a top tier groundsman, this right here is what you want to be looking at to do. If you have any questions, always ask your climber, like, hey, would you like me to throw a line into that long limb? You know, if we can take it out in a big piece, let's do it. I can set it up for you. And you send it up on a limb that you feel is suitable, or you get the second opinion from a more experienced climber, like, hey, can I set it up here? Send it on up, and then boom, look, now you saved your climber from having a limb walk something that's super long and him having to waste a bunch of energy, and you can take out a whole lead easy peasy. So as I'll show you here how that goes. But yes, top tier groundsmen know how to do this. They can identify these scenarios, and again, you don't have to be like 10 years in the industry. Like if you see a limb that you think is going to get rigged out, you can ask your climber, like, hey, if I can throw a ball into that and save you 10 minutes of having to struggle to go out on a limb, you know. And it's not so much a struggle either, it's more so about conserving the energy, because a lot of these things you can do from the ground, you just sometimes you don't see it. So yeah, there's just another example of how to be a better groundsman. And as you can see here, we set it up. We're putting a little bit of pressure on it with the GRCS. That's just a fancy rigging device, which allows us to pull up a lot of weight. And we're just gonna take the whole piece out all in one. And we set this all up from the ground, avoiding having to do any climbing. And as a groundsman, you know, practice with your throw ball. You can do this too. You can achieve a lot of things from the ground. You just gotta have a little bit of imagination, right? Coordinate with the climber. As you can see here, we're taking out this giant lead all from the ground. We did this all from the ground. So there we go, one big lead. Here's another episode of the Arborist Study Guide. Thank you guys for watching. Appreciate it. And if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Feel free to hit me up on the comments. And with all that said, we will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.